Hey everybody, John Malanca, United Patients Group. Good to be here. Good to see you. Just had a great interview and podcast with Mary Biles, and she's a journalist as well as a CBD industry leader based out of the UK. And she's an author, but she just talks about the global CBD market, what's happening with patients that she's seeing over in Europe as well as in the UK. I know together, but they're about to split, so that's why I say that. But just sharing what she is finding and the trickle effect of education. She's a internationally known author. The CBD book, The Essential Guide to CBD Oil, Harper-Collins Publishing did that, but really informative podcast. And so I hope you enjoy that. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below or hit our like page and subscribe. We love the feedback and we enjoy putting out information like this for you. So thanks for your support. Have a great day and enjoy this podcast. Bye-bye. Welcome back, everybody. This is John Malanca with United Patients Group. Be informed and be well. And today I have a special guest from the other side of the pond, Mary Biles. Hey, Mary.
Hi, John.
That's the first. Actually, I had a guest on from Israel the other day, so we're making we're
going international.
We're making this international. We're getting out of the COVID bubble, and so. Excited to have you on here. So let me read your informative bio. How about that? Okay. Mary Biles, a medical cannabis journalist and CBD industry insider, has a unique perspective on why we could all do well with some CBD in our life. Following a varied career in TV production as well as complementary therapist, Mary decided her talents were better utilized educating the world about the medicinal properties of the cannabis plant after seeing firsthand extraordinary health benefits in a close friend. Is that with your friend's mother?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Going with, yeah. I'll get into that, but her Mary's close friend's mother also had pancreatic cancer, and so we can go into that after this. But Mary has been one of the most demand CBD content specialists in Europe as well as here in the United States, writing educational articles for a host of CBD companies and regularly contributing to the Huffington Post. To this day, she continues to interview top scientists in cannabinoid research and tell inspirational patient stories as part of her work as a medical cannabis journalist for internationally respected educational organizations such as Project CBD, which is right up the road from us. So,
great.
So know them well. So good to have you on. You were chuckling.
Thanks.
You were chuckling on on your bio.
It just sounds so funny, doesn't it? Because you get asked to write bios for stuff, and obviously you have to sort of like hype yourself up, and it's a bit cringy. But I suppose that it was all stuff that I can attest to.
I found that online and where your book is sold. So we'll talk about your book and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So as I'm looking at myself, like I told you, I haven't had a haircut and I'm seeing these curls and I'm not used to. So I guess it's my
a few
COVID
grays
curls
coming through as well. But never mind. Yeah.
That's so funny. So well, good to have you on. And so let's talk. Well, your book, and I'll go into that. But it's called the CBD book, The Essential Guide to CBD Oil. Harper-Collins, congratulations, is a publisher on that one. And so we'll put links and we'll get them to your book and go from there. But your personal story, everyone has a personal story. Not everyone, but many have a personal story of getting into this industry. Can you start with that and get to where we are today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it started really, I was living in Spain. At the moment, I'm based in the UK, but I was living in Spain. And it really was, well, actually, I guess the first seed was sown actually with an ex-boyfriend who was growing cannabis. His friend had cancer and he decided to grow some cannabis. And I remember watching videos with him. There was the kind of classic Rick Simpson video, and like the first time I heard of CBD and cannabinoids, and I couldn't pronounce it and didn't really, I was like, okay, interesting. Next, and then maybe sort of 2 years later, a very good friend of mine who is from Belgium, her mum had pancreatic cancer, and I just sort of, witnessed how, she'd had the treatment. It was terminal. And she really coped very badly with morphine, basically. It just, and I mean, it's like taking a sledgehammer to pain, essentially. So, but in this case, actually, it wasn't controlling the pain, but she'd lost, all lucidity. She was suffering terribly. And she just wanted, it all to be over, really. And her children, who, are adults, and my friend's mum was, in a kind of, well, she was about to be, I think she made it to 80 before she died. But her children, thought, okay, how can we think outside of the box? And had heard something about, about cannabis and its medicinal effects. And their GP was kind of forward thinking and found a loophole that they could prescribe cannabis oil. And, I was witnessing this from another country. So I was hearing this all kind of secondhand. But I never sort of forget when, unfortunately, my friend's mum died. But I remember, vividly the conversation in my kitchen in Seville when Anna was telling me about, what cannabis allowed for her mum, which was basically to die with dignity. So, she completely recovered her lucidity. She wasn't in pain. She had a bit of appetite. She was a little bit stoned, so she, could have a giggle with her family. And it just meant that those final 2 months weren't hellish suffering. It was a good death, actually. And for me, cannabis is also about living, but for me, being able to die well is a kind of fundamental human right. And I felt enraged. I felt absolutely enraged that so many people were being denied this right, really, because of cannabis prohibition. So as a kind of backdrop to that, at the time I was living in Seville. I was writing, I had a blog about, the city where I lived, and I was writing about kind of other stuff. I'd just written something about ayahuasca, which was published on CNN. And so I kind of my head was already in the kind of plant medicine world. So I kind of, I remember I was in my kitchen and I promised to Anna I was going to do something about it, this injustice. So it was like, 2 weeks later, there was a hemp fair in Seville where I was living. So I got myself a press pass, just sort of, went along again, completely naive, cannabis naive, totally. But with a view to just doing some research and maybe write an article. There were 2 CBD companies. So this is back in 2016. So it's kind of before, CBD went crazy, worldwide. And there were 2 CBD companies. And I just kind of chatted to both of them. One of them, which was a company called Endocannabinoid, which, I'm very grateful to them, because if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. I kind of was chatting to the founder's mum was there, and we were chatting, and it turns out they're looking for a full-time writer. And sort of 2 weeks later,
pick me, huh?
Yeah. Well, and I had a week later, or a few days later, I had a interview with their head of marketing, and then I was hired, basically. So it kind of, this tremendous, it felt like the stars had aligned, and also, before that, I couldn't really work out. I've always been quite random in my profession. So, I worked in TV. I was a complementary therapist. I've also been an English teacher. That, various seemingly unrelated things that I've done, but suddenly it all kind of came together. My sort of background, I had to, study anatomy and physiology to be a complementary therapist. So I had an understanding of the body, and, kind of an interest in holistic health. My kind of journalism background from TV and writing, obviously all came into play. So I just kind of immersed myself. I had free reign to kind of write what I wanted. This was before the times when, the kind of different regulatory agencies cracked down on what you could and what you couldn't write about. So I just, I was living in Spain, where they're, in Madrid at the Complutense University, they have some of the best scientists who've made the most, as you know yourself, the most, groundbreaking discoveries, particularly with cancer and the anti-tumoral.
Is that where Cristina Sanchez?
Yes, yeah, Cristina Sanchez and Manuel Guzman, and the whole kind of team there. So I would just kind of interview them, and I don't know, I just felt I'd found my calling, really, and so that's kind of how it all started. I particularly became fascinated by the endocannabinoid system, because it was like this, I think it's something for the medical professions who are not within the cannabis space and the general public at large, they can be feel a bit incredulous, really, that hang on a sec, how can the cannabis plant, which by the way for 70 years they've been told is this kind of demonic plant that's going to lead you to psychosis and all sorts of terrible things, how can it have these kind of therapeutic benefits for everything from epilepsy, cancer, pain, nausea, you name it. And then as soon as I started to kind of understand the endocannabinoid system, it was like, people need to know about this. Okay, it's about cannabis, but it's also the endocannabinoid system is not only the bridge and how cannabinoids act in our body, but we should be over and above cannabis, we should be paying attention to our endocannabinoid system. Doctors need to know about it, even if they're not prescribing cannabis, at least, if you've got fibromyalgia patients or patients with those kind of clusters of symptoms, yeah, they're missing a massive trick, right? So yes, that's me.
It's amazing when you get down to it, because it's funny. I worked for a magazine for years as well, and Corinne picked me up at the airport one day, and we were driving by one of our convention centers, and it had cannabis convention. This is 2009, I think. I said, pull over, and she looks at me. I go, let's go in there. Let's just see what it was. A Friday night. We walked in there, and I walked around, and I said, it says medical on here, but there's nothing medical about it. And we met a couple people, started talking to the same thing, and said, didn't think anything of it. We got home, and I was traveling a lot. And she said, let's see if we can do something. And so we started looking at how can we get in the cannabis industry. And Corinne, I called her Mary Poppins. She didn't drink and didn't smoke. And I kid you not, that was in our wedding vows, my Mary Poppins. And we started building something in the industry. It was just a site, a coupon site. And then her father became ill. And we said, oh my gosh, stop the press, and the same thing. We saw the benefits of cannabis, not knowing the true benefit. We knew appetite stimulation munchies. And for a cancer patient, we came across a study that showed 40% of cancer patients passed on malnutrition before cancer. Same thing with AIDS patients, wasting syndrome. And that's how our story began. And so, like you said, the planets aligned, the stars aligned, and here we are today, 10 plus years later, and helped a lot of patients. And like you said, if we didn't live in a legal state, it wouldn't have ever been an option. It wouldn't have been an option. You mentioned your friend Anna's mom in Belgium. I lived in Belgium, and two of my friends' moms passed with pancreatic. And my friend Gaston, his mom, they used cannabis, and the same thing. She passed with dignity. They traveled. She was in no pain, and he just saw this. I have children now. He said, I saw this plant, this capsule we were taking. My mom was eating. She was happy. Let's go travel. They went all over Italy. They went all the way down to Dubai. They traveled, and she passed, and she was never in any pain. And then 2 years later, Corinne gets sick, and I'm thinking, what's going on with this, And so for anybody going through pancreatic cancer, any of our listeners, I've learned a lot. I'm certain Mary has as well. And so I've shared all the time with all cancer patients, but pancreatic, please reach out to me, because I've done a lot of studying when Corinne was ill with Corinne. And then afterwards, I've met a lot of doctors and scientists, not only in the cannabis sector, but in the integrative oncology world that are having success with pancreatic. And so I mean that if anybody's going through this, please reach out, which a lot of you do on a regular basis. So that was my, sorry, I had to throw that out there. When I hear pancreatic, I just stop and, I know what it's like. I know what it's like on both sides. As a health advocate, helping families, avoid the tangled web, bridging the gap. And I know what it's like being a caregiver. I know it's like being a spouse, a widow now, and so I think that's why I relate to a lot of families and patients and doctors saying, help. So with the laws changing in Europe and globally, and I know you're a global journalist, what's going on with let's go with the CBD laws. Kind of breaks the ice. There's still a stigma. There's still a stigma here in California. California's been legal since 1996 for medical use. Like you said, it's was a medicine here 83 years ago, and they stopped that. And it's carried on overseas. And it's funny. Before we got on the call, you said the United States is leading the way, and I always talked about Israel, many countries in Europe, China, South America, Canada.
It's a perception, right? I think maybe because in the UK, there's always, I don't know, the special relationship with the United States in general, and sort of, there, for example, there was a kind of entertainment/documentary series in the UK a couple of years ago, and they took a bunch of aging celebrities to around the US on a kind of like cannabis road trip, but kind of suggesting that that it was the most advanced, and I guess it's a kind of we don't necessarily understand the complexities, and I think each country has its own idiosyncrasies and failings, and and nowhere's perfect. That's the thing right now in the UK. I mean, in the world, we can kind of some bits are working in some countries, some bits are working better in others, and so I guess we as I think you said before, it's kind of like the blind leading the blind, but hopefully there'll be some kind of harmonization at some point in the future.
All the different, like you were talking about all the different ailments. I always talk about it's not like duct tape with 1,000,001 uses, but when you really get down to it, scientists Manuel Guzman and Christina Sant, Doctor, she's a doctor, right? Or scientist?
Yeah, she's a doctor. Yeah.
Their studies, and it's funny. I recommend them as leaders from the U.S.
But the irony is that this is the crazy thing. So I'm kind of between the UK and still my heart is a little bit in Spain. So it's tragic really in Spain, because they've got these incredible scientists, not just within the area of cancer, but neurodegenerative diseases and whole in cannabinoid science. They are in many respects leading the way, and yet patients in Spain do not have legal access to medical cannabis. They don't, and actually that's not understood. The amount of times I've read that, in Spain, the medical cannabis is legalized. No, it isn't. Yeah. No, it isn't,
they're underground. When Corinne and I were there back in 2014, 15, I believe, we met some underground. There are some underground cannabis clubs.
Yeah, and that they're underground, but they're also, I mean, again, there's sort of the gray zone. I mean, I was a member of one, and they have these sort of ways of being kind of semi-legal. You're a member. You don't, they don't get raided by the police or anything like that. Although in Barcelona, I think there were a few problems because there was a kind of industry building up around it, and it wasn't supposed to be. That wasn't its intention. But and also in Spain, you can grow. You can grow your own, as long as it's not like you can't see it from the road or something like that. So. But as I say, nowhere's perfect. That's the thing, and it's. But I really feel for. I've got sort of friends and colleagues in Spain who are battling, but there's no political will. There's no political. And what's infuriating is that Spain is exporting. It's exporting medical cannabis. It's been grown in Spain and exported elsewhere. But Spanish people can't get access themselves.
So let's talk about exporting. It's a perfect lead into your article. What is your FDA, your Food Drug Administration, called? European?
Well, there's EFSA, which is the European Food Standards Authority. I'm in the UK. We're about to leave Europe in about sort of, I don't know, what are we now? Well, about 20 days time. Yeah. So we have a kind of a UK version of that, the Food Standards Agency. So that there's been a lot of upsets in the last couple of years because CBD, or actually cannabinoids in general, have been added to something called the Novel Foods Catalogue. So basically, a novel food is in Europe is something that wasn't commonly consumed prior to 1997. So so kind of CBD seemed to be kind of going under the radar that these regulatory bodies weren't getting involved, and then suddenly in January, I think it was 2019, they sort of very quietly added cannabinoids to this novel food catalog, basically, which then means once it's been added to that, you have to, in order to kind of market it or sell products selling CBD, they have to like make an application, a novel foods application with toxicology reports and proving its safety, basically. Because if it's novel, the idea is we don't know if it's safe.
You're sorry, Mary. Your definition of a novel is like our cannabis brownies or cannabis water, a CBD water. Is that what you're?
The thing is, basically, it seemed to be, if at the time, CBD is classed as a food. It's not a narcotic. That's another kind. There's another kind of chapter to this story. At the time, it was not a narcotic, so therefore it was classed as a food. But there's nothing in between. It's either narcotic or food. Nothing in between.
But it went food, narcotic, and back to food now, right?
But food, narcotic, and now back to food.
Back to food. And so, like over here, cannabis. And I had a lawyer on the show a few weeks ago, and I asked him about CBD, and he says, well, my dad always taught me that it was the term, it's clear as mud, meaning there's still a gray area. Like over here, cannabis is still for, that's why the scientists, like you were mentioning, we don't have that it's not really public with our scientists, global scientists like the rest of the world has, because it's still federally legal, Schedule 1 narcotic, still classified with heroin, LSD, highly addictive, no medical benefits, ecstasy's on there, and cannabis is on there. And that just blows my mind, with no medical benefits. But they have it as a patent, as a neuroprotector with medical benefits. And so is there, with the narcotic scheduling that you have over there, where does that stand? Is it still like we have Schedule 1 is the number one most dangerous?
So I mean, I can talk from a kind of UK perspective. So we have the scheduling, because you had obviously you had the single convention of narcotic drugs, which was the kind of 1961 UN convention. So I think then each country, each kind of member state created their own version of it, basically. So in the United States, you have one, I can't remember what it's called now, the one that was in 1970. You have a kind of convention that came from which the classification of cannabis in Schedule 1 came from that original.
We had the Schaefer Committee, and then of course President Nixon. Are you talking that? Where they kind of and that was around the 70s.
Right. Yeah. So we have an equivalent in the UK. So for until 2 years ago in the UK, cannabis was Schedule 1, like it is in the United States. In November 2018, or actually before that, it was 6 months before that changed. Cannabis was reclassified, as is often the case, with these things. It became untenable because we had two cases, very public cases of young children with epilepsy that was intractable, and so it didn't respond to anti-seizure medication. And these children both had left the UK. They became medical cannabis refugees. One was in Holland, another one was in Canada. But they wanted to come home, and if they came home, their medication would be confiscated, basically. So it kind of forced our politicians into acknowledging, because basically, as soon as these children stopped taking their medication, their seizures would come back, and actually those politicians were going to be responsible in some way if one of these children, passed away or something terrible happened. And that doesn't look terribly good. So thankfully, they actually got some balls, excuse my language, but because this has been on the table before with Theresa May, who then went on to become our prime minister. But she had, there was something called the Barnes report, which was a cross-party report on cannabis with doctors and patients and scientists, but she still was sticking to that Schedule 1, there is no evidence, only sort of liable for abuse and et cetera, et cetera. So thankfully, the Home Secretary in 2018, actually acknowledged, this is indisputable. These children, their seizures are reduced. So we're going to have to change the scheduling, which kind of brought about the gradual process, which culminated in 2018 of the legalization of medical cannabis. So then at that point, we were, as long, with other countries like Canada, we were no longer following that kind of UN scheduling, which actually is just being changed, last week, but it's been taken out of Schedule 4. So that the last week it was the kind of the Committee for Narcotic Drugs had decided to thankfully acknowledge that actually there is evidence of therapeutic benefit.
That's what really brought, I guess, the walls down, because I think they were so anti-cannabis at the THC level, which in my opinion is needed to fight cancer. And I think even in epileptic children, minute amount, you can give CBD, yes, it'll work. Add a little THC, we found, has really dropped those.
Yeah, I mean, this was the case with these two children. I mean, just CBD wasn't enough. And so when they actually left the UK for this period of time, they had a little bit of THC, and that was enough to pretty much reduce their seizures to zero. And so, but that little bit of THC at the time was illegal, completely illegal in the UK. So that's what forced the change.
And unfortunately, that's what happened. Well, I should say, unfortunately, the children, pediatric epilepsy is what really brought CBD to the market over here. And so you had a lot of CBD only states. And that's what, again, brought the stigma down and started working. And it was unfortunate. I worked with families that had two children. One had a seizure disorder, one had cancer. They lived in a CBD only state where cancer was not a qualified condition. And so unfortunately, their cancer child was an illegal patient using illegal narcotic, while the seizure patient was a legal part, getting legal medicine. I mean, it was just, it's backwards. And and I know is it in the UK, or is that all over Europe, where they just repassed it to mirror our 0.3%, because your legal limit for THC for a while was 0.2%, correct?
It was, and that's kind of was the legal definition of hemp, basically. Yes. So that's now being changed to 0.3. I think there is a move, because in Switzerland, for example, you can have 1% THC. So there is a move. I know the European Industrial Hemp Association are, putting together, I think they're doing kind of toxicology reports and different kind of, studies to show what are safe levels of THC. So, I think what the main thing with increasing it to 0.3% meant that now you have, for farmers and for producers, CBD producers, you've got more options of strains, basically, or varieties or cultivars, I think that's the proper word, isn't it, of hemp. So it just gives more options, really, for actually getting kind of CBD rich products. So that's
from the UK, or is that being
well, you know what I mean, in the UK there is this absurd situation that farmers, if they're hemp farmers, it's okay to grow hemp. I think probably you have to have a license, I expect. You can use the stalks, you can use the seeds, but you cannot use the flowering tops. So so this, in the UK, there's this huge CBD market, and God, so many CBD companies, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. It's like, they're all like saying, oh yes, the best quality, best
we hear it here too.
CBD in the world, but actually what's interesting is, because they can't get it from UK grown hemp, they import it from European hemp farmers or suppliers and producers, or sometimes North American as well. And basically, that it's kind of it's white labeling, really, and so all these different UK CBD companies are essentially selling, about 5 different types of products and just sticking their labels on them. So, but it's kind of, I really hope for hemp farmers that will change. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I get a lot of, over the years, I worked with a lot of UK residents, patients as well. And, when they hear stories which are happening over here with success, and this is, the internet journalists like yourself sharing stories, you want to try it. And I think it's tough when a patient, even here in the United States, a lot of them become cannabis refugees. I shared, it's not the easiest thing to leave your family, your homes, your church, your community, your doctors. Go and see if this works. It's not a one size fits all. It doesn't work for everybody. So before you uproot your family, I always tell them, take a 2-week vacation if you're able to. Try it, see if it works, then go back. But I share and to many of the, is Brit a common word? Can I call them Brits?
You can call us Brits, that's fine.
Brits? Yeah. So, but a lot of the Brits that I speak to on a regular basis, it blows their minds when I say, there is a pharmaceutical company in your country called GW Pharmaceutical. And they said, yeah, I've never heard of it. Does GW, this has been over the last few years, maybe they're making more waves, but are they not a household name over there?
No. Because the approved pharmaceutical cannabinoid based drugs, well, there's 2, obviously. There's Sativex, which is which I think has a different name in the United States, but it's
it's still the same. So you have
Sativex. Is it? Okay, I thought it was like Nabanols or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's a kind of 1-to-1 ratio THC and CBD, but it's only prescribed in spasticity and pain in multiple sclerosis. And for a while, because it was really expensive, and remember in the UK we have the National Health Service, which yay, that's essentially publicly funded free healthcare. But it's in order for our National Health Service to approve a drug, it has to be both effective for what it's treating, but also cost effective. And at the time, or for many years, Sativex was approved as a pharmaceutical drug, but it was too expensive to be prescribed by our NHS. That changed recently. So as I was sort of talking about before, since 2018, there has been medical cannabis is now legal, and this is something important for your listeners and viewers in the United Kingdom to know that. So yeah, Sativex, there are MS patients who are now being prescribed Sativex, Epidiolex, which is the kind of purified CBD for, in the UK, it's just for Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut, which are these, very kind of catastrophic and rare types of pediatric epilepsy. But what's happened basically, because it's, it's very, very narrow and very, very few cases or few conditions where cannabis can be prescribed through the NHS. There's been a whole kind of like 2 tiers. So we've got private medical cannabis clinics that have opened up, and there's maybe, I think it's about 4 or 5 now that have opened. And initially, because of various kind of supply chain difficulties, and it was, there was a lot of kind of, I guess, fear with regulators about what this was going to lead to, medical cannabis being available initially for patients, a prescription, and maybe this is normal in the US, I don't know, but, patients are paying like kind of £2,000. So that's like 3,000. How many? Would that be $1,500
US?
Yeah. So about a month for the medication, and then maybe like kind of $150 for a consultation. So that was when things kind of first started. The prices have come down, and I think there will be a point, because actually in the United Kingdom, it's estimated there are about 1.4 million people who are using cannabis medicinally, the majority of which are getting it from the black market. So, for many, obviously, if your medication from your doctor was working, you'd rather do that, right? You don't want to have to kind of go and find a dealer or whatever. It's not your kind of first choice. But for for a lot of patients, initially when there was this legalization, it was very prohibitively expensive.
With it being 2.75 milligrams of THC, 2.75 milligrams of CBD, people just said over here, the consumer over in America, seeing all the studies of GW Pharmaceuticals side effects, they said, so everyone started making a 1-to-1 ratios over here. And so, and having success, not only with MS patients, but with other. And then Epidiolex came out, and my thought, and you tell me as a journalist, my thought is, okay, they missed the boat over here. They replicated the 2.75 milligrams of each. And so the US government said, okay, with GW Pharmaceutical, this is just my mindset, is, okay, let's try something else. We'll bring your Epidiolex over here. We'll reschedule it. Now it's available for prescription. Insurance, not all, but some insurance will cover it, and you can pick it up at our local pharmacy if you want it. And so now I think that's where they're making all their money, because I know for a while GW was not making any money, and they're doing an amazing thing. And I have friends that their daughter is autistic, and I introduced them to cannabis about 4 years ago with success, but different cultivars. You and I can have the same bottle. We buy it, and then 2 months later we buy the same exact bottle, and it's a different thing because of, hopefully one day it'll get that point where it's the same every single time, like you would with a pharmaceutical, Tylenol or something. And their neurologist, they get EEGs, and they said, I'm not seeing this. I don't feel a success. And they said, well, there's a product called Epidiolex. How about prescribing it? And the doctor here at UCLA knew nothing about it. So they've been on it for a good year and a half now with success.
Okay, that's interesting.
Are you seeing that, is where I was going with that?
I mean,
is it available over there?
Epidiolex is available, but just for Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet.
Gotcha.
To be honest, it's interesting that this patient that you're talking about has had success with just CBD, because to be honest, I've heard from other mums, really, because often these are, kind of more severe mums of children with more kind of severe types of autism, who may be nonverbal or have those kind of self-injurious behavior. And I've heard more than one occasion, actually, the kind of high CBD strains have actually kind of made it worse, or kind of made them more hyperactive, and actually they kind of needed that bit of THC. In the UK, I think there are patients with these particular conditions who've been prescribed through our NHS Epidiolex. Otherwise, we've got these private clinics who are prescribing unlicensed drugs. So these are more the kind of, your Bedrocam products, or, the kind of that haven't been through the clinical trials, etc. But they are standardized GMP, they're standardized products, but they're not products that are sort of NHS doctors would feel confident prescribing, because for them there's not the evidence. Everything has to be evidence-based. What's interesting in the UK, we're talking about this before, at least they can actually prescribe it. As I say, this idea that we have everything's great and rosy in the United States, it's, I don't think in the UK people realize that actually you can, doctors can't prescribe, they can make recommendations, and then you have to kind of send your patient off to a dispensary, right? Or, somewhere, and they speak to a bud tender or what have you. So, it's not perfect in the UK, because here it's only consultants essentially that can prescribe. So what you've got are these private clinics where you've got pain consultants who top of their field, and they're maybe actually I don't know, sort of heads of the pain society or what have you, and also we have psychiatrists, pediatric neurologists, that kind of thing. But they're new to cannabis. They've never done it before. So they're having to get trained and learn about the endocannabinoid system. And so they're kind of starting from zero. So it's not, I think what is kind of, I suppose, limited here at the moment is there's very much a focus on THC and CBD. So for that, I think that's kind of all doctors can get their heads around. And there's no anything minor cannabinoids or terpenes, because actually, these kind of standardized products, they don't really say what else is in them. I mean, I'm not saying there's like, chemical, I don't know, mold or anything like that, but they don't say what are the minor cannabinoids, what are the terpenes. So it's sort of, I don't know, it still feels quite crude in a way, but it's better than nothing for sure. And the prices are coming down. So there will be a point approaching, if not already, where for certain patients who perhaps don't need the kind of massive amounts of milligrams every day, that they're spending possibly less a month than they would be if they're going to the black market, and they're under the care of a consultant, which I think that's hugely important. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're just, I know, with cannabis, you're up titrating, you're listening to your body, etc. But you kind of need to know, is there going to be some interaction with my prescribed medication? That kind of stuff is really, really important. Someone who's looking after your care.
And that's something that I share all the time. It's not one size fits all. You should look at age, weight, current health condition, stage of ailment, or whatever you're battling, and drug to drug interactions, because we've had, patients that have never tried cannabis. They're taking, neuropathy patients for diabetes or cancer, and they're taking their oxycodone, 4 or 5 a day, like you and I would take a breath mint, and they try 2 milligrams of cannabis, and they are stoned out of their mind, climbing the wall. And they said, you know what, I'll never do cannabis again. I said, no, you're mixing them just like you wouldn't, have alcohol with that. And so give it a try. But education like this, I think educating, and that's what we pride on, at least United Patient Group. We've always come in education first. We've done, Crit and I were big into conferences, and we'd had all of our conferences were accredited for medical professionals, CME, continuing medical education. And so we would have 85% of our attendees were medical professionals, not only here in the US, but around the world, that knew nothing about cannabis and wanted to learn. And so, and they would get credits for that. And so I just think what you're doing as a journalist and others out there of, and I always use the analogy of throwing a pebble in the pond and seeing the ripple effect of education going out, and sharing stories, and seeing patients share stories to like moms, as you're saying, because my friend, with her daughter, that's her number one advocate, and she educated the UCLA doctor. Okay, if you don't want us to go down to our local dispensary and get this thing, how about prescribing? Well, what are you talking about? You know nothing about Epidiolex? If you want to prescribe it. And so last week, actually about 10 days ago, they had they do about 3 EEGs a year, and they did see some drop in the seizures with that. And so the doctor was pleasantly surprised, and I'm certain that doctor will go do some more research on that. And you were going to say something. Sorry, Mary.
No, I was going to say, I think it's the cannabis movement worldwide is patient-led. And that is, fantastic. So exactly, I think, a mother's love, in so many instances we've seen, obviously a father also loves their child, but it seems to be mothers who just push this movement along. But, the kind of flip side of the coin is that certainly, I don't know, in the UK, patient experts tend to kind of, not always get a very sort of warm reception from doctors, because doctors don't like their patient to know more than they do. And that's, I really feel for patients in that situation. I mean, it's, sometimes with, I always sort of think about these children with epilepsy, and they're neurologists within the NHS. As soon as they hear that they're going to a private clinic and they're under the care of a specialist, they no longer want to have them as patients. It's they don't want to. There's this kind of resistance. Why, if you're a doctor, why don't you have this curiosity when you see patients getting better? Aren't you like, hang on a sec, that's like the 4th patient who I was, oncologist, for example, there's so many patients, again, in the UK, it's not a condition that can be prescribed cannabis legally. And so, like anywhere in the world, there are thousands of patients who, through Facebook groups, etc., they've got a community and they're, self-medicating, etc. But, when you're an oncologist and you've seen a series of patients who say, oh, by the way, I'm taking cannabis, and those patients, their outcome far exceeds the norm, wouldn't you kind of ask yourself, hang on a sec, I need to investigate this. And I think some do. I mean, there was an amazing case. I love this story of this gentleman. This was in the UK. I think he had lung cancer, and he was, you know, he's in his 80s. He decided not to have any chemo or radiotherapy or anything like that, because he just, you know, wanted to sort of enjoy what he had left. And he just sort of got some CBD, you know, randomly chose some, and wasn't taking very high doses actually. And then when he went back to have an appointment with his doctor, his oncologist, X amount of months later, and he had some tests, what have you, it was like the tumor had practically disappeared. And they're like, what have you been doing? And he's, you know, have you changed anything? And he's like, well, I just started taking some CBD. But that oncologist did actually write a paper about it. Good. You know, so I think you just have to hope. And I encourage patients. I know it's, you know, it's scary because, you know, oncologists and consultants are these kind of authority figures, and there's always this fear that they're going to sort of threaten not to, you know, give you the treatment if you reveal that you are using cannabis. But you know, please do say, because, you know, little by little, that kind of penny starts to drop. And I think, you know, there's a point where, you know, it's a tipping point, basically, a tipping point for sure.
And that's something that I share with patients all over the world is, even if you live in a legal state or legal country, or legal state or legal country, it's not illegal to ask the question. Ask the question. This is your health. And if there's another option, hey doctor, have you heard of this? Share these cases. And we've had doctors here that work for major cancer institutions that have called us and said, you know, I made a promise to my patient that I'd do some research. Can you help me? And I applaud those doctors, because they're, you know, not too many of those are out there, but it's, you know, the topic of cannabis is starting to diminish, meaning the stigma. Even other natural, like you're talking about ayahuasca, you know, and psilocybin, that is another topic that's been around for thousands of years that people have kind of pushed away. But it's coming back now. You know, Colorado recently passed a law. Oregon here in the States has passed a law. And so, but education is what I love. And you're talking about mums. I can tell you, there's some great dads out there and moms. But my friend Mike Hyde, his son Cash was the first and youngest legal medical cannabis patient in the whole United States. He was the pioneer, and no one wanted to cover the story. He beat cancer twice, and he was 4 years old. And Cash, he ended up passing because the laws changed in Montana, but he would share to families, moms and dads, listen, if a sign said it's federally legal to go swimming in that water, but your son's in there drowning, he said, you better believe I'm jumping in that water. And so it meant a lot, because I've done a lot with that family. He's one of my best friends, but Cashy passed, and because of laws, you know, the laws were there in Montana in their state, and then they said, oh, we made a mistake. We opened the doors too early now, you know, and now it doesn't matter if you have hiccups, you know, our national TV station will, oh, boy cures hiccups with cannabis, you know, they'll talk about it, but then it wasn't ready. They weren't ready. And so I don't want him to be forgotten. I don't want Anna's mother to be forgotten. What was her name?
Josine.
Was it?
Josine.
And of course, my wife, Corinne, to be forgotten. I mean, you know, and so, I mean, if any of these stories help, this is why we continue doing this. Let's talk about your book and what you're doing. Yeah,
great. I mean, actually, the case studies and the stories in the book are sort of my favorite part of the book, in all honesty, because it is about, you know, I mean, there's, you know, I write about science. There's a, you know, I kind of unpack the science behind CBD and the endocannabinoid system. I talk a lot about the research, you know, the kind of potted history of you know, kind of CBD and hemp, etc. But it's the patient stories that just bring the book to life, really. So, you know, without having to kind of cast the net too far, I spoke to different people, a mum of little boy with autism who, you know, just 8 days into taking CBD, had his kind of first conversation with his mum, which was to tell her that his head didn't hurt anymore and he wasn't scared anymore. It's like insane. And actually a very, very dear friend of mine, actually, who she's this amazing woman who works on a refugee camp in Athens, who's this kind of amazing force of nature, so positive. But, as you can imagine, if you're working, every day in a refugee camp, you start to get sort of PTSD, anxiety, etc., etc. So she was having panic attacks and kind of waking up in the middle of the night, seeing the faces of refugees that she couldn't help and all that kind of stuff. And she, because she knew me, CBD was on her radar, and she started taking it. And alongside, she's a yoga practitioner, and because I think it has to be part of, particularly if you're an adult, it has to be part of other stuff. But it really, she's no longer having panic attacks, and she's kind of over her PTSD. But yeah, just loads of stories like that, and that's actually, I was sort of doing the research for the book and interviewing people. I kind of record the interviews, and when you write an article or in this case a book, you cut and paste the best bits, like, oh yeah, I use that nice quote, and then you kind of stitch it together in your own words and stuff. But when I was listening back to their stories in their own words, I was like, damn, these people need to have their own platform. It's like, it's not the same me just retelling their story. So I at the beginning of kind of COVID lockdown, I decided I was going to, launch my own podcast called
and I want to say that. And so for those of you who've not, and it wasn't in your bio, and I apologize, because I like sharing others' podcasts and out there. And so so if you haven't had a chance, there's some, Mary, you do a great job, first off, but you have some incredible guests. And I know a lot of them, so I may have to reach out to a couple of you and say, "Hey guys, come over here, let me do it." But talk about that. It's on Mary Biles, BILES.com.
Or if wherever you listen to your podcast, you'll find Cannabis Voices. Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture of, as I say, patients, parents of patients, scientists. I really, I'm a bit ashamed to say I barely scraped through my kind of high school science exams, but now I kind of find myself being a science writer essentially. So, but I'm fascinated by, the how it all works, and so when I'm writing articles, you kind of, I don't understand everything in a scientific paper, but I can kind of pull out the salient points. But I love to hear the stories behind it, and so it's one of my favorite things to speak to the scientists. So, the likes of Christina, I mentioned before, Manuel, Greg Girdman, who is brilliant on the endocannabinoid system, Ethan Russo. And I love hearing people's stories, and so that's what it's about, really. I mean, sometimes I kind of tie them in if I'm doing something for Project CBD. Again, if I'm writing an article, I just think it's really important, if it's about, I don't know, Alzheimer's or something, that you not only do you go direct to the source and speak to the scientist. Maybe it wouldn't quite be so possible with Alzheimer's to speak to a patient, but so I often, if I'm writing a Project CBD article, I'll maybe use the interview in a podcast or something like that. But no, I really love it. But also, sort of getting back to the book, it's I think one of them from a practical point of view, and I think this is the same for wherever you are in the world, really, be it in Europe or United States. If you're someone who's like, oh, I'd really like to try CBD, and then you kind of like, type in Google or whichever is your, search engine of your choice. And it's just, it's like thousands and thousands of companies and products come up. And I used to sort of work a little bit in digital marketing. So I know all the tricks that they play, the kind of, the search engine optimization, all the keywords and all that kind of stuff. So I know a lot of it is just, it's not great products, but they just happen to be able to do. Who has the most marketing dollars? Yeah, exactly. So I kind of, the book really, if nothing else, it's if someone like has in their little hands and spend some time reading through the different steps of just kind of explaining, the different types of products, difference between whole plant, broad spectrum, the entourage effect, all these different things. And then you just follow the steps, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll get to a point of being able to buy a reliable product that is going to have the best chance of actually helping you in some way. So it's kind of, for me, it's a roadmap, and it's been really gratifying, because I've seen, people have like, I used it and now I've got my product, and now I'm, and that's kind of what it's all about, really.
Well, good. Is it on audiobook as well?
I don't think so. It's in hardback at the moment, and it's also ebook. So if you're in the United States, I know people have bought it in the US, but it just takes a long time to get there, because I don't think they've sorted out the rights for it to be kind of sold through Amazon, the US version. But you can buy it, and it just will get shipped from the United Kingdom. But I think, if you're in Europe, it gets there much.
And Harper-Collins, not a shabby publishing company. So
no,
congratulations on that too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Question before we go to, and I meant to ask you earlier, for Americans going into the UK or are coming, are they able to bring their medicine over there? I get that quite a bit, and I don't want to put anybody in jeopardy, and if you don't know the answer,
I don't know the answer actually. I mean, they'd have to. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, maybe because in the United States, it's whether a kind of recommendation would be enough. If you're coming through customs, I would have to look into it.
I've had patients. I said, boy, you're talking about, I think you said balls earlier, because I've had a patient say, I said, you've got bigger balls than I do, because they said, I've gone through, I've shown my letter of recommendation, and I've shown my product, and I've gone through here. At
least it worked. Okay.
But I said, but what's going to stop that I make it through the TSA, which is the security here, and I hand you my packet, and you go off to the UK, and so that's the part that I don't know a lot. But anyway, I'll do some research, and I'll put in the links here. Any closing words?
I don't know. Yeah, it's education. And for me, what I don't know, I feel compelled to do the work that I'm doing, and it's this is a kind of fundamental human right. We have a human right to wellness when it's possible, and this plant is one tool that can be used, and also for me it's also about defending the plant itself, because I do fear for a time in the future where, it's just going to be kind of, I don't know, synthetic, isolated compounds and all the rest of it. And we still won't be able to have access to this plant that we've been given, So, I think we just have to keep fighting and informing ourselves and trying to get the message out of the echo chamber, because that's the thing. It's like, there's more information getting out, but it's still, sort of within the cannabis community, although that is changing in the UK. That is changing.
Well, you mentioned tools, and I'm a big fan of tools. It's what you put in your body. Sleep is important, getting exercise, being surrounded by good people, love, and then good products. And so you can find that in the CBD book, The Essential Guide to CBD Oil. Mary Biles, I so appreciate your time, and I know, and there you are. And I'll put a link to that as well on this podcast. And our podcast go video, of course, without the glitches. I'll see if I can edit those out, but audio, and we're, like you, located, I think, about 18 different channels. Then we do a transcript for the people.
Oh, that's good.
You want to read as well.
People can read my words as well. How thrilling.
Yeah. And it was funny when you
please use British spelling.
But earlier when you said balls, I was thinking to myself, I wonder how they're going to translate that on the transcript. But I thank you so much, Mary. And
thank you for having me.
I'll put all your links out there too. And thank you for our listeners. I hope you enjoyed this. This is John Malanca with the United Patients Group. Be informed and be well, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Hi, John Malanca here with United Patients Group. I hope you've enjoyed our videos. Please click like as well as subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. Also, follow us on Twitter at Patients Group and on Facebook at United Patients Group, as well as for our podcast. Please click the link in the description below. We'll see you there. Bye-bye.